And we are live.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, wherever the heck in the world you are. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, and we have none other with us than the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend himself, the enigma that is Harley Schlanger. Harley, how are you, buddy? How's it going?
Doing pretty well for someone who's an enigma.
I had to throw something snazzy and different in there, Harley. So
Yeah,
enigma was the first thing that came upon me. I'm so tired. It's a rainy, gloomy day here in New York, and I feel like low energy Jeb at this moment.
Oh man, we're having a beautiful golden November day here in Berlin.
Ah, it's awesome. Have you gone on the Nürburgring yet?
Gone where?
The Nürburgring in Germany.
No, I haven't.
You should make a point. When I get there, we will go together.
Okay.
I promise.
Okay.
Harley, there's so many things going on. We have the midterm elections in full swing. So many. I mean, people are literally right now holding their breath, seeing which way the nation is going to sway. A lot of people are saying, can an upset be pulled here that will shock the world? This is what's happening over here, and there's also a lot of other things that are happening. I'd say probably even more important things that have more of an impact on us, and that is the crisis right now in the European banks. Where do you want to begin, Harley?
Well, let's start with the election because it's probably too late to influence people to vote now. But what people should realize is, well, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, especially because of all the lying in the media, the huge amounts of money that have been poured in, the polls, which really are totally unreliable. I saw one story that said that out of 8,000 people who were polled by one polling agency, only 600 responded. So, all the predictions and forecasts are shaped by the views that the people doing the polls had going in. But one thing is unmistakable. No matter what happens with the vote, actually, I should add one other thing first. There's still a possibility for significant vote fraud coming from some of these states where the Democrats still control the machinery. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But whatever happens in the vote, what we're seeing now in the United States is that a growing section of the population has become, as they say, awakened, realizes that politics as presented by the media is a fraud, and that in fact the control of the U.S. political system comes from the City of London and Wall Street, and that this is a system that has broken down. The financial system is cratering. The political strategic alliances that were built on the basis of that system are collapsing. The political parties that support that system are going out of business, whether it's here in Germany, whether it's the Italian situation, Mexico, a totally new party elected the president, Brazil. You have a breakdown of the old system. And the question of what replaces it is not going to be traditional Democratic or Republican policies, because the two parties themselves are undergoing a significant shift. Remember, the Republican Party going into 2016 was still the Bush Party. It was still the neocon and neoliberal party, and Trump took it away from them with a brilliant campaign. Then the Democratic Party, in an attempt to counter Trump, became the war party. I mean, it had already been moving in that direction under Obama and Hillary, but openly became the war party and also the party of Wall Street. Now, I think Trump has pulled the Republican Party under his control now. We saw that with his maneuvering around the Kavanaugh case, where even people like Corker and Flake and some of these flaky Republicans were forced to stick with Trump. So the Republican Party has shifted. The Democratic Party is a mess. It has no leadership. It has no policy except anti-Trump. So coming out of the elections, no matter who controls the House and the Senate, Trump is still the president, and he's definitely feeling his oats. He's already laid out a diplomatic agenda for the post-election period, which includes 2 meetings with Putin, one at the November 11th Armistice Commemoration Day, and then another one at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires, where he'll also meet with Xi Jinping. Plus, he's invited Putin to Washington. And when you want to talk about chutzpah, given the insanity of the anti-Russian sentiments from the mainstream political networks, the media, and so on, inviting Putin to come to Washington is a very interesting proposal. Now, given that we have this shift going on in the strategic situation, whatever happens in the election won't change that because Trump can make foreign policy. That's the president's prerogative. The Democrats can try and screw it up, but I think they'll do that at the expense of the country and will turn the country against them if they try to do that. So the real issue coming out of the election is what's going to be done with the economy. And I think we're seeing some signs, including Trump's attacks on Federal Reserve Chairman Powell and the Federal Reserve insertion of itself into the economy, which of course it always does. I mean, the Federal Reserve thinks it runs the economy, and it does for the good of the private banks, the biggest banks. But I think we'll see some shifts occurring there. So it will be very interesting. And I say this again to repeat, regardless of what happens with the vote today, we're in a new strategic situation. The EU is collapsing. NATO is a relic. The Russians and the Chinese are on the ascendancy, and that's not necessarily bad because they're ascending against the collapsed system. And the question is, will we in the United States allow the globalists to define what the United States does? That is, go into opposition to this insurgency worldwide? Or will the insurgency that elected Trump link up with the rebellion in these other countries against the establishment and bring online a new paradigm for the world?
Absolutely, and that's the whole entire thing. If we come out of this election winning and we still on this backward, murderous foreign policy that makes no sense, if we don't stop Trump is doing his best to dismantle a lot of things. We have to catch that ascendancy train. We have to catch that ascendancy train, and be part of this league, of this new league of nations who are productive, who are innovative, who are part of this new physical economy that's being built up, these new trade zones. I believe 100%, Harley, and I agree with you that should be the future of the United States.
Well, right now in Beijing, or maybe it's in Shanghai, there's a conference, a commercial industrial exposition being held by the Chinese that has 1,500 people represented. It's more than 30 heads of state. It includes, from the United States, we don't have any official government participation, but a large number of corporations have sent CEOs or leading officials to participate. It's a trade exposition. It's a discussion process about the future of industry. And the indications are, if you listen to what Xi Jinping said in his opening presentation, he said, look, China has opened its economy dramatically in the last years, and we're going to continue to do so, even if there's opposition to our policies coming from the United States. But then he said he's hoping that the promising relationship between himself and Trump will enable a better U.S.-China cooperation. And I think this is really crucial. This gets right to the core question, what you just said. Are we going to have a world in which the emphasis is going to be on physical production, the production of new wealth? When people talk about value added and they talk about the service sector, that's a fraud. The service sector was never set up to be a driver of an economy. It can be a driver of bubbles, as we've seen with Amazon and Facebook and so on. But the service sector doesn't produce anything tangible. What you need is an investment policy, a credit policy, which allows industries to upgrade their productivity through scientific technological advance. And by doing that, you can create a surplus beyond what it cost in the investment to do that. That's real value added. That's how a real economy works. That's how the U.S. economy worked from World War II through the Kennedy period. And we've seen bits and pieces of that, but it's mostly been dismantled. We've lost a significant portion of our industrial manufacturing economy. I just read a story today about a Taiwanese firm that's got a company in Wisconsin, and they can't hire enough American engineers to run their company. They're asking for an exception to bring in Chinese engineers. So we've lost a dramatic segment of what made our country the most productive, powerful nation in the world. And we've got to restore that. And that means physical economy, what the Chinese are doing. Even the Russians are making progress in this. Now, I'll just tell you, in Europe, there's a degradation going on, which is mirroring what we're seeing in the United States. Under Merkel, under the CDU, SPD, Grand Coalition, they're destroying physical economic capabilities. The energy policy, this radical green policy, has nothing to do with protecting the environment. It has to do with a radical depopulation policy, which is what the so-called environmentalists, including people like Obama and Hillary Clinton, support. An evil satanic vision of reducing world population using hoaxes like the carbon dioxide fraud as a means of shutting down industry. So the real fight coming out of the election is the American system of physical economy versus a speculative bubble economy run by central banks and their select few large, too big to fail institutions. Now, you mentioned the European banking situation. They just did a so-called stress test. And these stress tests are frauds. For example, the sample that they used for looking at the European banks is what would happen in a worst-case scenario of a 2% drop in assets at the banks. Now, in 2008, there was anywhere from 5 to 7% drop in assets. So how can you run a stress test talking about a 2% drop? And even using that minimal figure, a number of banks, including Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Barclays, failed the test. They couldn't go with a reorganization plan based on their existing capital asset ratios. So what do? They say, well, we'll run another stress test in 6 months, and what they're going to do is change the parameters so that they'll pass it. So this is a fraud, and people are suffering because of this. So I think the good thing is with programs like yours, where you present a picture of real economic thinking and its relationship to strategy, that we're seeing a growing segment of the U.S. population thinking on a higher level. That's how you save the country. That's what a republic is about, where citizens are intimately involved in the deliberative process of determining where the country's going. Under the nanny state of the Democrats and the elitist state of the neolibs and neocons in the Republican Party, the population is left out. We're acted upon as opposed to being an active part of shaping policy. And that's something that has changed in this new Trump era. And it's something that we have to keep fighting to expand.
Harley, Xi Jinping talked about a $30 trillion trade deal that he's going to be doing for the next 15 years, the recent summit in China. What do you think? And I know that Trump is going to have a talk with Xi very soon. And I know that, all these things are happening in Asia, especially Japan throwing their hat in with this new trade zones that are opening up over there. How does this parlay with U.S. politics, and what do you see a chance of this, all these things being smoothed out?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, the truth of the tariff policy is that while Trump was correct in addressing a deficit, the China-U.S. deficit is huge, the solution is not to punish China with tariffs. And Trump knows that. Trump himself said, look, it's not the fault of the Chinese, it's the fault of the World Trade Organization and the free trade agreements that were made by his predecessors. So that being said, let's get rid of those trade agreements. And one of the things Xi Jinping was talking about is transforming the World Trade Organization from a corporate oligarchical system into actually looking at the question of what will increase the volumes of trade in a way that's fair. Now, that's what Trump has been talking about. So I think, and then you see the shifting position of Larry Kudlow, one day saying there's no alternative to these tariffs, the next day saying, well, we could throw out the tariffs tomorrow morning. The key is the discussion. And Trump and Xi Jinping, when they met in Mar-a-Lago back, I believe, in March or April 2017, had an excellent rapport. They've continued that. Their phone conversation the other day, both sides said, was very productive. So I think they're going to come up with the beginnings of a broad framework, which is a rejection of the corporatist free trade policies of Bush, Obama, and Hillary Clinton, and a return to bilateral and multilateral agreements in key areas, for example, in steel, in copper, in oil. And this also then will take up the whole question of what do you do to deal with the speculation on commodities. And I'm expecting that something in the near future is going to start targeting the swindle of commodity and currency speculation. And the key guy in the crosshairs of that is George Soros, because he's been the front man, the wrecking ball deployed by the City of London against not just developing sector economies, but against the US dollar and against the British pound and against the euro. Why do we tolerate this kind of speculative frenzy, which builds up unsustainable debt, puts it into the portfolios of pension holders so that if it blows out, Soros doesn't feel the pinch. But if your $50,000 401k gets hit, you're wiped out with nothing left. Why is that allowed? And I think these are some of the things that have to be addressed, how it is that the speculators control things. And I think this is something the Chinese have dealt with effectively. They've been going through a trial and error process of how to take down a bubble, how to limit speculation, and they're not going to open their banking system the way Peter Navarro is demanding that they do it. But they'll say to Trump, look, banks are there to invest in real production, in construction, in mining, manufacturing, not to make profits for the traders. And I think this is something Trump agrees with. So I think this is the basis of a potential relationship there, which could very well include the United States being brought into a collaborative relationship with the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. That would be absolutely wonderful. Your thoughts, your final thoughts, Harley, on the last few things that could be on your radar screen right about now.
Well, like everyone else, I'll be watching the elections, although unlike Americans, I won't be able to see them until tomorrow morning here in Europe. But the immediate task is going to be, regardless of what happens, to lay out an agenda for the future. Trump has already done that in terms of his foreign policy with the series of meetings, including an upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un. Now we've got to get serious about the economy. And while Trump was playing up the stock market gains during the campaign, I think he's going to have to make the assessment that the so-called booming stock market was based on unsustainable levels of free money going to corporations to buy their own stocks. That's not a recovery policy. So he's got to look seriously at LaRouche's proposals, the four laws, the Glass-Steagall, the Hamiltonian credit policy, investment in the front end of the high-tech infrastructure, and then science driver projects like nuclear fusion, space, and so on. That these are the areas where we can get the productivity gains that will enable us to not collapse under a mountain of debt, but to be able to start writing down or writing off the debt, let the speculators take the losses, but increase the physical side of the economy. And that's where we have to go after the election. And that's what I'm going to be fighting for. And I think that we have a good shot at it, regardless of what happens with the results today.
Absolutely. Very well said. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much for coming on with us, and thank you for spending your time with us. We look forward to have you on again. Folks, subscribe, like, comment, and share. And with that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, CJ.